So hi and welcome to this NPTEL course titled A Novel and Change. We're looking at Jhumpa Lahiri's fiction, The Lowlands, particularly in relation to the role of transgression and female agency as dramatized in the novel. So in the screen, we should look at, there should appear the idea of the disruptive metamorphosis in the lowland and how that corresponds to the different forms of embodiment and agency articulation that we see in Lahiri's novel. So we talked about already how the whole idea of transculturation and transgression may be correlated with each other in times of complex cultural formations, and how agency and identity become functions of performance, functions of negotiation rather than static entities. A theme that we have seen in other novels as well in this course, particularly, let's say, in Arkin Narayan's Guide, but also more recently in Sitsi Dangarembga's novel Nervous Conditions. So now we'll focus on Lahiri's novel and see how the same politics of embodiment gets played out in different formats. So in her latest novel, Lahiri seems particularly attracted by the logic of transgression, as she creates characters that embrace a trespassing stance in order to shut up conventional rules. By proposing to Gauri, Subhash seems to break an ethical standard. So Gauri, of course, is a widow of Subhash's brother Udayan, who gets killed in a police encounter during the very violent Naxalbari movement in West Bengal. Subhash happens to be in the United States at the time, so he comes back and he meets Gauri, and he feels guilty about Gauri in terms of how Gauri's life has been interrupted tragically, and he proposes marriage to Gauri, which she accepts. But of course, the novel takes a complex turn from that point, and Gauri, of course, is a mother. She gives birth to a daughter called Bela, whom she leaves behind in order to get absorbed in a more academic profession. So, by proposing to Gauri, Subhash seems to break an ethical standard, so marrying the dead brother's wife. As this union is haunted by Udayan's ghostly presence. So there's a very interesting role of spectrality in Lahiri's novel, and the idea of the spectre, the dead ghost of Udayan, who keeps coming back, who keeps appearing in different forms. By marrying without his parents' approval, Udayan crosses a line as he places an individual option beyond the family's aspirations. So even the first marriage of Gauri, when she got married to Udayan, was something against Udayan's parents' approval. So there is a moment of transgression about that as well. So different forms of transgressions take place in a novel. Gauri herself operates perhaps the most abrupt transgression of social roles when she decides to leave Bella, the daughter, in Subhash's care. Unable to become involved in stable relationships, Gauri eventually falls in love with a woman. So again, the whole idea of breaking away from heteronormative love, stepping out of a heterosexual condition. In her turn, young Bella struggles to accept her mother's gesture by constantly running away, struggling to transcend her need for attachment. The result of Bella's trauma is a choice to become a single mother, determined to find solace in an itinerant life, right? So the different forms of iteration, movement, betrayal, transgression happening in Lahiri's novel, and in a very intergenerational way as well. Lahiri's previous work portrays most of the first generation Indian women's immigrants as guardians of traditions. But the lowland completely changes its pattern. So, in a more traditional conservative framework, the woman is seen as the embodiment of values, the gatekeeper of traditions, as it were, where the men have the luxury to be prodigal, the luxury to be subversive and transgressive. But in this novel, the lowland is the other way around. So the women are given transgressive agency, or agencies to enact transgression. In creating Gauri, it seems that Jhumpa Lahiri has intended to push the mechanism of cultural transgression to its extremes. Gauri is a first-generation voluntary immigrant who strives to define herself in opposition with traditional Hindu values. Even prior to, so again, when we talk about Hindu values, there is a certain template that she's supposed to correspond to, supposed to, adhere to, which she departs from, and that departure is obviously dramatic, but also slow. So there is this non-dramatic subversion in Lahiri's fiction as well, where someone like Gauri is enacting different forms of subversion, sometimes covertly, sometimes through slow processes. Even prior to her departure, Gauri is presented as a non-conformist young woman attracted to academic pursuits. I agree with Habib's remark that before her marriage to Udayan, Gauri's unconventional life kept her aloof from traditional social customs. Her decision to marry Udayan represents the first unconventional step, expressing a voluntary choice and not a Hindu traditional arrangement, because this goes against the parents' wishes. So obviously, it is not conservative in a kinship sense, in a familial sense. So it becomes more of a privatization of individual will, individual agency against families' consent or approval. Uh, Gauri's acceptance of Subhash's proposal, which is another transgression, and a relocation to America signal further transgressions. Migration by marriage with a brother-in-law is valued as an opportunity for reinvention in a dimension devoid of pressures to conform. So this becomes some kind of a template for how to depart from social customs, depart from conventional customs. So traveling or shifting to America or United States over here becomes a step in the process of transgression that Gauri embodies and enacts. So, and there's a quotation from the novel. She sat among so many passengers, passive, awaiting their destinations. Most of them, like Gauri, waiting to be freed in an atmosphere not their own. This was a place where she could put things behind her. So again, moving away or liberating herself from the baggage of the past, as it were, the different spectral remnants of the past, as she moves ahead in time in order to forge a future of her own choice. So Gauri's feelings on her way to America suggest that she regards transplantation as an opportunity for self-reinvention in a novel cultural dimension. So there's a sense of self-fashioning going on over here, and a shift to America becomes some kind of a reenactment of transgression, reenactment of agency, finding a footing, finding something which is purely out of her own volition, without a need to conform to any codes of behavior, spiritual, moral, or social. Thus, the specific difference of the American setting seems to afford the distance necessary for self-reinvention beyond particular constraints, right? So this need to, or the liberty to push beyond the constraints, push beyond the conforming codes or the codes which are meant to be conformed, is something that Gauri enacts, and therein lies a transgression. But of course, it doesn't stop there. She pushes even further by liberating herself from the conformed or conformity to family values, and including motherhood, including parenthood, and her shift towards an academic life, an academic profession, and of course the finding of love in a non-heteronormative setting relationship is also part of the extreme transgressive process which are dramatized in this novel. And of course, the next section is titled Embracing Academia and Fearing Motherhood. So you can see how the title over here is a bit of a giveaway, fearing motherhood. So motherhood over here is something that she resents, is something that she wants to move away from. And again, there's no moral judgment happening over here. There's no moral value judgment, whether it's right or wrong, morally correct or incorrect. That is not the question over here. But the important thing for us to underline here is the element of choice, and how the character over here is choosing to go for something that she purely wants, outside of any need or any pressure to conform to a collective template. So the first indicator of Gauri's reinvention along rebel lines is her intention to continue her academic plan. So the academic pursuit becomes part of the plan through which she can, chalk her territory, through which she can do a self-fashioning or, enact her growth. During her pregnancy, she anonymously attends classes at the philosophy department of the university where Subhash is hired. So the male working in a university setting is something more conventional, especially at that point in time. We talked about 70s and 80s. But for a first generation South Asian female migrant, finding a footing in a university setting in that white Western academic American world is something of a very uncommon thing, and Gauri obviously does it in a very clandestine way. So she secretly attends and anonymously attends classes in the university where Subhash is working. So Gauri's unconventional stance is also suggested by her sudden decision to give up visual marks of ethnicity, such as traditional Indian clothing. Gauri's atypicality is also foregrounded by her desire to avoid female members of the Indian immigrant community. So the whole idea of breaking away from any pressure to conform to the Indian template or Indian code of femininity is something that Gauri deliberately does. I have nothing in common with them, she said. Her apathic, hostile attitude towards conservative immigrants reveals Gauri's quest for redefinition in centrifugal cultural terms. The centrifugal is important because it is from the subject, from the point, right? Not towards the point, but from the point. So centrifugal. So if you look at Gauri as some kind of a field of behavior, a field of cultural appropriations and self-appropriation and self-fashioning, it operates on a centrifugal basis from what she wants rather than what is given to her, right? So there's the element of appropriation, aspiration that Gauri is enacting here. Another aspect that illustrates Gauri's transgressive urge is represented by her reluctance to become totally engaged in a motherhood condition. After giving birth, Gauri feels overwhelmed by her new responsibilities and she lets Subhash handle most of her tasks. Moreover, Gauri is keen on continuing her studies, indirectly reminding Subhash of the promise he had made before they got married. Right? So the whole idea of privatizing her own education, privatizing her own career over the responsibilities of motherhood that society or the social norms confer on the female subject is an interesting choice over here. And again, the important word here is choice. It's a choice of the subject to do that, to break away from the stereotypes or the economy of expectations that are given to the mother female subject, and that's something that Gauri wants to depart from. Just like she wants to make a departure from the other Indian woman in that diasporic demography in the United States. Dividing her time between looking after Bela and going to philosophy classes, Gauri perceives motherhood as an obstacle to her professional ambition. So again, look at how in which motherhood is redefined or re-ontologized almost from an experiential position. So from an experiential position of Gauri, motherhood here is an impediment to her progress, an impediment to her ideal action plan of growth and self-development and the trajectory through which she wants to self-fashion her identity in the United States. She was not only ashamed of her feelings, but also frightened that the final task Udayan had left her with, the long task of raising Bela, was not bringing meaning to her life. So this whole production of meaning and the whole experience of meaning becomes a very subjective experience to Gauri, and raising Bela seems to her a meaningless task. So again, we're not debating the value over here or the moral valency of this choice, but we're just looking at or highlighting the element of choice over here and how Gauri seems to have the choice not to conform to the stereotypical female roles which are conferred to her, because it doesn't give her the desired meaning. So Gauri feels imprisoned by the motherhood role. So again, the element of being, caged up in a role of motherhood, instead of giving her sustenance or meaning, it takes away meaning from her life. Envying Subhash's working schedule that keeps him away from parental duties. So the whole idea of envying the male who has more access to the public space, who has more access to the professional space, while she feels constrained by the dimensions and the claustrophobic conditions of female space of nurturing the child, which is seen as an impediment, like you said, to her growth. As Bela reaches 6 years old, Bela develops a secret routine meant to provide free time and solitude. Every day she leaves the daughter companionless at home, while she enjoys the autonomy of solitary walk. So this idea of going for a walk is very important because, as you know, there's a long history of studying walking in the city, and you find that, let's say the example of the flaneur, the French walker across the metropolis, you find that the construct or the cultural construct of the leisurely walker was almost entirely male in 19th century, very bourgeois, Parisian setting. But this gradual appropriation of the public metropolitan space by the female also becomes important. And of course, Gauri appropriates the role of the walker, going for walks, solitary walks, to gather herself, to give her some sense of solitary tranquility. as opposed to the constant pressure of conformity that she finds herself subjected to. So it began in the afternoons, not every afternoon, but often enough, too often, disoriented by the sense of freedom, devouring the sensation as a beggar devours food. So again, the sense of nourishment, the metaphor of food becomes important. It's a gastronomic metaphor, also a nourishment metaphor. So the sense of solitary walks, it gives her a sense of freedom, a sense of liberation, a sense of fulfillment, which is almost as essential and vital for her as food is. And the idea of equating her as a beggar who's craving for food is important because she craves for that self-space, that sense of solitariness and tranquility, which are much more coveted to her than looking after her daughter or carrying out the motherhood functions that are expected of her from a societal framework. So you can see how different forms of transgression operate, sometimes overtly, sometimes covertly, sometimes spectacularly through access to public space, but also almost entirely through a very deep-seated psychological process. So Gauri's thirst for freedom outside the family sphere illustrates her yearning for empowerment as a condition of detachment from maternal responsibilities, right? The yearning over here, the desire to depart, the desire to detach from maternal responsibilities, it becomes really important for her. Now, Bella, of course, a child, Bella represents the undeniable and definitive link between Gauri and Udayan, a bond that transcends the reality of Udayan's death. Her presence is a constant reminder of Udayan's loss and of Gauri's indirect involvement in loss of human life. So again, we find how Bella becomes a living reminder, an embodiment of the death of Udayan, and how she constantly connects Udayan with the survivor, or Gauri in this particular case, but also she embodies absence, anxiety, grief, and also guilt to a certain extent. Upon Udayan's request, Gauri agreed to spy on a policeman and inform Udayan of his daily schedule. She was not aware that Udayan's fellows were planning the policeman's assassination and needed an approximation of his daily routine. So she was, in some sense, perhaps inadvertently or unknowingly, unwittingly, complicit in the entire program of going after the police, which ultimately caused Udayan's death. Perhaps Gauri's inability to create and maintain a bond with her own child springs from her incapacity to forget her past and forgive herself. So how she considers herself to be responsible in many ways for Udayan's death. Gauri's dedication to an academic career may illustrate her need to block the pain and guilt of her Indian youth. So the sense of erasure that she wants to enact, the erasing away her past, erasing away what transpired during her Indian youth, but also a yearning for oblivion, a yearning for forgetting in some sense. So she wants this amnesic relationship with the past where she forgets everything, and it's very strategic amnesia that she wants to create by it also a coping mechanism, but also a sense of detachment and blankness attributed to the past, which she doesn't want to continue into a present and, more importantly, to the future. Now she wants to forge a certain kind of future ahead, purely out of her volition, purely out of her will and agency, by dramatically departing from what transpired many years ago. So we can see how space-time become a compound or a capsule entangled with each other, because there's a sense of departure from a space from Kolkata, and she moves on to obviously US, but there's also a sense of detachment from time. She wants to move away from the past, she wants to forget the past, to create an oblivion apropos of the past, and using that oblivion, she wants to forge a certain new time, a new form of temporality ahead of her. But that becomes important for us to note as well. So equipped with the awareness that she cannot be a proper mother, Gauri redirects her efforts to the world of research. So the research over here is a very interesting point, how the entire academic journey of Gauri may also be seen as a coping mechanism, may also be seen as a form through which she wants to move ahead in time, an appropriate sense of freedom, a sense of new time, a new space, a new time. So academia gives her this new space-time, a new chronotop, if you will, which liberates her from the older space-time, which are full of guilt, which are full of haunting memories. which are full of pain in many ways, and also her sense of desire to detach from what transpired many years ago, to take control of her life in a sense. Now, although she spends most of her time at home with Bela, they're actually separated by Gauri's seclusion in a spare bedroom turned into her office. Hours would pass, the door not opening, her mother not emerging. So we can see the other thing that is important in the novel and really well done at the level of craft is the varying focal points. So there are stories told, there are experiences narrated from Bela's perspective, where she's waiting for her mother to appear, but the mother not appearing. The door keeps getting shut. The door is not opening, and that waiting for the door to open becomes a lingering awaiting, a lingering moment for the mother, longing for the mother, which doesn't quite materialize into a closure. Although Bela seems satisfied to share the home space with her mother, she registers Gauri's maternal attitude towards the research. She spoke of it as she might speak of an infant, telling her father one night at dinner that she worried about the pages being blown out of her open window or being destroyed by a fire. So there's a sense of how she wants to protect Gauri's research as well, right? So we can see how there's an interesting relationship that is there in terms of a transference of the motherly instinct from the biological organism to the academic object, which is a research, and the academic object becomes some kind of a quasi protege, a quasi progeny, which emerges in the end as more valuable, as more endearing, as more connectable compared to the biological human being, because there's a sense of separation that Gauri has from Bela, but of course she gets more and more attached and more connected at a visceral level, really, with the research, which then becomes a child that she is more fond of in many sense. Now, this detail about protecting the research as if protecting the child clearly implies that Gauri's academic interest represents a rechanneling of her unexpressed motherly care for Bela. So the sense that she reroutes her motherly instincts from the human to the academic body is important and also quite symbolic in many sense. The next section discusses Gauri's decision to leave her family and the process of self-redefinition as she starts a new life on the West Coast. So again, we find that how after arriving in the United States, how she goes for a life outside of the territory, how she redefines the territory, how she redefines the domestic space, and how she eventually liberates herself from the domestic space in a very spatio-temporal, but also to other forms, other markers such as sexuality, kinship, and so on and so forth. The fact that she falls in love with a woman and starts living a non-heteronormative life outside of the conventional moral territory, sexual territory, becomes an important aspect in the novel. And of course, part of the transgressive politics that Lahiri is very keen to represent. So the next section is about transcultural reinvention via relocation. So the idea of reinvention or self-fashioning through relocation becomes important. So we've seen already how the different migratory patterns in a novel correspond to different forms of self-iteration and reiteration. So Gauri's decision to move to California in itself another transgression, the fact that she chooses to move to a certain part of the United States outside of the control of Subhash is also important. Subhash is instrumental in bringing her to the United States, but then she wants more agency, she wants to act of her own volition, so she moves away from that male control and tries to chalk out a territoriality of her own, which is obviously an enactment of a purer form of agency. So this reinforces the idea, this transgression reinforces the idea that she cannot dissociate Bela from a shared history with the lion. Gauri's abandonment of her mother role may express her attempt to resolve her trauma by ceaseless withdrawal. The fact that this abandonment, abandoning the daughter really, can also be seen as an act of coping mechanism apropos of her trauma. The fact that she looks more and more inwardly in terms of how she detaches herself from any form of kinship, any form of conventional kinship becomes important here. So the character appears as an embodiment of individualistic values as she chooses to focus on her own struggle and overlook the pain of a family member. So this is a whole idea over here, how this can be seen how as an act of extreme self-centeredness, maybe selfishness also, but we have to look at it from a very complex cognitive perspective. The fact that this also becomes some kind of a coping mechanism, as I mentioned, which helps focus on her life in terms of attributing meaningfulness to certain aspects, certain action plans, certain forms of imagination ahead, which may be detached from other forms of commitment, other forms of kinship. Her radical choice is the only way she can approach her inner conflict, by adding more distance between herself and the source of her sorrow. So, in a very interesting way, Bela becomes the embodiment of her sorrow. Bela becomes a living embodiment, a living organism which keeps connecting her back with the past that she wants to move away from. So, her abandoning of Bela becomes the final symbolic rejection of her abandoning her past, right? And she obviously moves ahead in time after the abandonment. So this becomes some kind of an event in her life as well, but also in the level of plot in the story. And this is, this appears on your screen as a quotation. She entered a new dimension, a place where a fresh life was given to her, right? So again, the dimensionality is important because it's obviously spatial, but also temporal. She forges ahead a new form of time, a new form of space. The 3 hours on her watch that separated her from Bela and Subhash were like a physical barrier. As massive as the mountains she had flown over to get here, she had done it, the worst thing that she could think of doing, right? So the sense of detachment also comes with guilt, also comes with an experiential ambivalence, but it's something that she had to do in terms of distancing herself from her past, and this becomes the final act of distancing. So Gauri's resettlement on the West Coast continues a personal itinerary of uprooting in the name of sovereign becoming. So the idea of becoming, sovereign becoming as a unique sense of becoming, unique sense of being is important because I can always only come through a process of uprooting. The character is presented in a recurring evasion from context that invoke the tragic circumstances of youth, right? So the idea of breaking away from time and breaking away from the past, or some kind of a forced oblivion, which is accompanied by some form of psychological violence. So there's a violence in terms of how Gauri wants to move away from the past, in terms of how she abandons the child, because the child represents or embodies to her connection with the past, and that rejection, that abandonment, becomes the final violent departure from the past. So mobility as peregrination becomes a particular healing strategy by which Gauri attempts to subdue her guilt and suffering. So you can see how movement over here becomes a healing strategy. Nomadism becomes a healing strategy at a very complex cognitive level. So Gauri values the nomadic freedom to relocate as a possibility to renounce attachments and thus protect herself from further anguish. So it also becomes a coping mechanism, as I mentioned, at a deep-rooted psychological level. Her redefinition along strong individualistic lines is facilitated by her unrestricted access to a mobile condition. So the fact that she chooses a life of mobility, a life of constant movement and transition, which is also transgression, becomes an act of agency, becomes an act of choice. Now, this her capacity to renounce family bonds and traditional female roles illustrates her intention to resist hegemonic conditions or coordinates of identity by simultaneously crossing physical and cultural boundaries. So the fact that she becomes quite literally transcultural, even within America, becomes an instantiation, an epitome of female transgression, an articulation of newer forms of agency, newer forms of embodiment, breaking away from the stereotypical profiling of motherhood, profiling of femininity. Now, Gauri's voluntary transplantation from India to America and her transition from the east to the west coast make up a chain of nomadic transgressions that helps her fashion a new subjectivity. So this is a self-fashioning I was talking about, how this becomes an act of choice, an act of willful volition, and this willful movement, willful enactment of agency becomes part of the complex self-fashioning of subjectivity that Gauri is trying to enact. The characters Metamorphosis highlights the transiency of identity, the mutability, the temporality, the episodic quality of identity, since it engulfs the effects of becoming generated by the flow of time and shaped by Gore's transition to a novel environment, right? So the whole idea of a transition to a novel environment, a new environment, and this urge, this appetite for newness, it's almost biological need for newness becomes part of the coping mechanism as well as the self-preservation technique, the self-preservation strategy of Gore in terms of how she tries to forget the past and move ahead and imagine a certain kind of future by taking control of a life, which also involves abandoning her child, or this ultimate rejection of the feminine role conferred to her by the value system that she grew up in. So we'll stop at this point today and we'll look at how this act of transgression further happens in a novel and how that corresponds to very complex formations of identities at different stages, at different nodal points in the novel. Thank you for your attention.